Right, let's start. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this event on how to commission rapid evidence assessments for policy. I'm Jonathan Breckon. I'm a Thematic Director for the International Public Policy Observatory, and I'll explain a little bit more about us and introduce the speakers. But just before I do, I'm just going to give you an overview of our session for wherever we are. I know lots of people have registered and we're watching a recording of this for wherever you are in the world, or whatever time zone. But for people who are here, I'm going to give a brief overview of a report we've done that I think is a very useful guide for how to go about rapid evidence assessments. And then I'm going to have the great privilege of three leading thinkers and doers on this topic who I'll introduce in a moment. And then we'll have plenty of opportunities for you to ask questions to the panel. Just to say, if you do want to ask questions, please do it by the chat function, not by Q&A. We had a lot of people registered and we're just going to get overrun if it's Q&A. So please use the chat function. And if you wanted to share anything, other reports, resources, or your own thoughts, please do in the chat. But if you want to ask a question, can you make it like a question, a really obvious one, i.e. ideally in one sentence, so I can read the question and feed it back to the speakers. So please make it clear if you've got a question, but don't hold back if you want to share things. We found in the past that there are lots of great material that can be shareable. Just to flag up, this event will be recorded and it will be put onto YouTube. So do hide yourself if you don't want to be seen there. We will be sharing the report, the slides, access to other resources right at the end of this event. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time before I introduce some of the speakers saying who we are and a bit of background. IPPO is an organization that finds, distills, and shares the best global evidence for policy and practice, but we're very much UK-wide, England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and very much about international insights and applications. One of the things we did is partnered up with 4 partners to produce this report that all of you will get at the end of this event. Actually, we might try and share it before we finish. But this guide is based on a pilot in the UK Parliament. It was with a body called the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, where it was based for 15 months, where we actually tried out rapid evidence assessments for 5 parliamentary select committees. So this report is based on that experience, which makes us very much have skin in the game. But it's also based on interviews and lots of key literature, including from all 3 organizations represented by our speakers today, which I think has some of the most useful insights about how to do rapid evidence assessments. But what this guide is trying to do, which is unique, is actually have a guide for how you go about commissioning and doing it. So it's not a methodological guide for how to do it, it's how to commission and get the best value, whether you're in government or a funder or another body who wants to go out there and commission rapid evidence assessments. So this report will be shared at the end. I've also got a blog, and it's a partnership between IPPO and CAPE, the Capabilities in Academic Policy Engagement, and RREAL, a really interesting body based at UCL, the Rapid Research Evaluation and Appraisal Lab, who did a lot of the grunt work and post in the UK Parliament. But before I introduce the speakers, I just want to clarify what we mean by rapid evidence assessments. We're not talking here about traditional literature reviews, which might cherry pick studies. We're talking about a more comprehensive, transparent, and systematic way of going about synthesizing research. Typically, it might have these sort of 8 stages. Other people might say there are different stages, but there needs to be a real structure and rigor to it, and definitely an openness to where you're cutting corners or how you went about finding the studies. So, for instance, I won't talk through all 8 stages. You might have a quality assessment, the stage 6 here. That sort of thing really makes it rather different to traditional literature reviews that I've been involved in for policy, where you're not going about it in such a structured manner. The type of reviews, these 4 here, this is from the guide, and the sort of categories that come up. So like I said, it's not the traditional rapid literature review that can, whether deliberately or not, cherry pick particular studies, which can be dangerous and sensitive policy areas. You want to be as comprehensive and as transparent as possible in some policy areas about how you found studies, why you've chosen some and not others. So it's the second area that we're focusing on today, but we might also talk about scoping reviews, which you might hear about, where you perhaps don't go into the findings, but you try and map out what's out there, or some other growing area, which is evidence maps or evidence and gap maps, which might actually have a visualization of what's out there and can be useful precursors to more deeper systematic reviews. So these are the kind of things we're talking about or not talking about. But finally, one other thing and a key message from our report is you might find that there's other existing rigorous systematic reviews are out here. Here's some that I've picked in terms of other resources to do and find rapid reviews that are already out there. They might not be quite right for your policy question, but do check them out before you jump in to doing a rapid evidence assessment. So that is actually one of our messages in the report. But I'm going to be delighted to hear if our speakers have similar messages, maybe disagree with some of these things. We'll find out soon. And if you indeed have your own comments and things you think we should look at, please do share in the chat function. But just to introduce the speakers now, I am just so delighted. We've got our A list of the best possible thinkers and doers in this space. Andrea Tricco she's written the go-to guide on how to do rapid reviews for the World Health Organization. I reference it a lot in our guide to commissioning, but she also has an extraordinary experience over many years, I think indeed hundreds of rapid reviews that she's been involved and responsible for. So delighted that we're going to hear from Andrea for 10 or 15 minutes first. We're then going to hear from Harry Akalini, who is from an organization that, from the UK perspective, I think is one of the go-to bodies on rapid reviews outside of health. They've really pioneered in so many fields how to go about synthesis. So I'm absolutely delighted we've got somebody from the policy field who commissions and indeed does do rapid reviews over many years. So we'll hear from Harry next. And then last but not least, the great Sandy Oliver, who was my co-author on the commissioning guide and also has an extraordinary depth and breadth of experience doing rapid reviews and indeed full systematic reviews across many areas and domains, and has written some really useful other guides and insights about how policymakers can get the best out of synthesis. So Sandy will be our third speaker, and then we'll open it up to question and answers. Just to remind you again that I will ask you to please to do things on a chat function for the Q&A. That will be really, really important to do. Try not to do it on the Q&A function, on the chat function. And I'll endeavor to summarize and share it. Tanzo, I know you've got a hand raised. Do you want to put something in the chat function? If you've got a question about anything, we'll try and answer it in the chat. But let's get straight to it. Andrea.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's just such a pleasure to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart, as you'll see through my presentation. So wanted to start off and just to note that we're very grateful to live and work on the land that we do, which is land now known as Toronto. Just in terms of some of my conflicts, so I do receive payment as a co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, and I hold a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair to advance rapid reviews, actually, as well as scoping reviews and network meta-analysis. I'm also the principal investigator of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, or CIHR-funded Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research SPORE Evidence Alliance, which I will be spending a few minutes talking about. And I sit on various journals as well. So wanted to talk to you a little bit about the SPORE Evidence Alliance. So this is a CIHR-funded initiative. So we originally have received $7.3 million of Canadian dollars in funding, with the potential of an additional $3 million that we just recently submitted a proposal for. So this is a pan-Canadian initiative. So we have about 13 co-principal investigators across Canada and 400 different members. And so we partner with patients and the public, as well as healthcare providers and health decision makers, health system decision makers or policymakers, to try to promote a Canadian health system increasingly informed and continuously improved using evidence. So our main functions are knowledge synthesis, but we also provide support on guidelines and knowledge translation. And the most popular product of our types of knowledge synthesis is the rapid review, just because it's timely for decision-making purposes. So everything that we do is informed by evidence-informed methods, so such as the guide that we wrote on rapid reviews in collaboration with the World Health Organization, and we promote an environment that is respectful, inclusive, and focused on collaboration. And we conduct researchers with as many different types of decision makers as possible. So since the launch of our query service in 2018, we've completed 235 requests. The majority of these are rapid reviews. We have 41 underway. So for our policy decision makers, which I know is the focus of today, so we do have a simple online form, and we try to get back to folks within 24 hours. So we usually set up a call, and what a big function of my central team is to match a research team with one of these policy decision-making organizations. So we have 35 plus research teams across Canada. We provide our teams with a lot of resources, so capacity building, coaching. We have different tools. So we also have an artificial intelligence or AI enhanced tool for screening to really expedite what we're doing. We also have a right review tool, which we've published on and tries to match up your research question with 41 different types of knowledge synthesis. And everything that we do is tailored to our policy decision makers' needs. So our query service is really a co-creation model or integrated knowledge translation. And we typically engage with 3 different types of knowledge users or decision makers. So patient and public partners, healthcare providers. So those would be clinicians and allied health professionals, as well as policymakers. And the goal is that everyone is engaged and that the sum is greater than the parts. So by engaging with all these different decision makers, I'm actually able to produce a product that is just so much more relevant and will actually be used. And we follow the ICMJE criteria for authorship, but our goal is for every project that everyone becomes co-authors. So we try our best to engage people as much as they would like, and also try to see if everyone could be a co-author on that. So we have researchers, patient and public partners, policymakers, and healthcare providers as co-authors on those projects. So we have, across our rapid reviews, about 13% so far have made it onto further publications. So we've tried to publish our rapid reviews, and we try to include these different various partners on those publications. In terms of training the next generation of scientists, we're very passionate about that and ensuring they have the skills to continue with this work. So on all of our projects, we try to engage trainees as well. So just to note that we have published before on this topic with a focus on policy decision makers. This was published in Implementation Science a while back. But just to say that the top, barriers is a lack of time, because it does take time to do co-creation or co-production. Actually, one of the largest facilitators was the decision maker expertise. So this was a scoping review, and 31 studies reported on these facilitators and barriers. Based on our experience, communication is key. So you want to make sure that you are keeping the communication going and making sure everyone is updated at every phase of the rapid review. We also published a paper on decision maker engagement. This was from the lens of a scoping review, but all of that to say you could use these tips for policy decision makers and rapid reviews as well. So you want to make sure you think through your plan. How are you going to work together? Does anyone need capacity building, whether it's the decision makers, is it the trainees, is it the research team or the patient partners? What will be your recruitment strategy if folks if there's turnover, for example, if the policymaker moves on to another position, who's going to take their place on the team? Some of these rapid reviews are done very quickly, so that may not necessarily be such a big issue when it's such a quick turnaround, but it is something to keep in mind. Showing appropriate appreciation. So, deciding upfront, will we be co-authors? Will we be acknowledged? How will we work together? If we have patient and public partners, will we provide them with proper compensation for their time, as an example? And then reporting this transparently. A lot of times we forget about reporting this in our report or publications, and also evaluating your engagement on an ongoing basis. So there are tools that you can use to evaluate your engagement, as well as tools to report your engagement. So for example, for patient engagement, you can use the GRIP2 tool. And for evaluating patient engagement, you can use something like the PEERS tool as examples. Just to say quickly, across our 276 queries that, a lot of them have focused on public health, but we've also done projects on economic and social response, as well as public and organizational policies. All of these were driven by decision makers. They all came in, including patient and public partners. And then, we've all of our reports are on our website, and we've done presentations and publications and other products as well. So Jonathan wanted me to talk a little bit about our COVID response. So we completed 143 rapid reviews. This was done by 20 different SPOR Evidence Alliance teams for 17 different policy decision-making organizations. From the patient partner engagement, so across 64 of those rapid reviews, we had 130 patient partners engaged. Several of them were converted into rapid living reviews, and they are still ongoing, some of them. 45 were these uber fast ones. So we, according to your table, Jonathan, we completed a lit search and everything, if you can believe it. These were done within 5 to 10 business days for those very urgent decision-making decisions that needed to be made. And of those, about 10%, so 4 of the 45 engaged 14 patient partners. So we have even been able to engage patient partners in these uber fast timelines. And then just in terms of some of our enablers, and Sandy has written on this as well. So having a pre-existing infrastructure, so having this ongoing funding from CIHR, having the teams in place, ready on standby, providing capacity building, not only to the patient partners, but also to the policy decision makers, and also providing several resources for the teams, as mentioned previously. So I wanted to provide this nice case example of extensive co-creation, and I believe the lead author, Dr. Veroniki, is actually joining us here today. So she completed a rapid review with a network meta-analysis. So this was a bit of a longer product, so in the months, several months range. And on here, so we recently published this in BMC Medicine. We have 3 policymakers that are named as co-authors from 2 governmental organizations, Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada. We have 4 clinicians or content experts, as well as 2 patient partners who contributed substantially to the project. And we also have a trainee. So this is a really nice case example of where we have very extensive co-creation in a rapid review product, and we followed it through to publication. And everyone was involved, at all steps of the entire process. Just to talk a little bit about when we receive topics from patient and public partners, we use a rapid or modified James Lind Alliance priority setting approach. This could be used across organizations or within organizations. It doesn't have to only be done for patient and public partners, but this is something that we do. So we've received about 110 questions from patients, and of those, we funded 23. And for these projects, we invite other decision makers to be involved, and these are actually co-led by patient and public partners. Several of our resources are available online, following this link if you are interested to learn more. In our work plan, you'll see that, and I know with the IPPO, Jonathan, in your work, you're very committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So you'll see in our work plan, for example, we prompt the researchers to consider equity considerations at every single step of the entire review process, whether it's a rapid review or other type of knowledge synthesis. So at the question level, are there subgroups of interest? Are there literature, when you're doing your literature search, are there different filters that you can use or databases that you can use? And we try to abstract information in all of our reviews on the Progress Plus equity framework, so that we're trying to always come from an equity lens. To learn more, we have published a series of papers in the Facets Journal, so please feel free to take a look at those. And again, want to say a huge funding acknowledge to CIHR and a huge acknowledgement to the Spore Evidence Alliance Central team for everything that they do. And then, thank you for inviting me here today, talking about something that I'm just very passionate about. And I love hearing from people. So if we don't have time to get to your question today, email me anytime. Again, I love hearing from you and love hearing all the great questions that you have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And just so much that we can learn from. I've got so many questions if others haven't. I just can't quite believe that 235, that big portion of those are rapid reviews, and doing some in 5 or 10 days with equity, with patient involvement, quite extraordinary. Just to flag up, we've moved to a new Zoom platform, and I believe people can't use the chat function. We're trying to resolve it now. If we can't resolve it, we're going to open it up so people can ask questions verbally. But just bear with us. Apologies about that chat function. Andrea, that was just fascinating. And I'm raring to ask questions, but time is pressing. So I'm going to go straight over to Harry, who sits in that policy domain as a commissioner, as people who might be using it. Harry, what are your insights on commissioning rapid evidence assessments?
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, I think I could also spend my 10 minutes just asking Andrea questions. But I do have some insights to share. So hello, everyone. I'm Harry Accolini. I work in the Research and Evidence Directorate in the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. I don't have slides, so you will just have to look at my face. But I'm going to be talking about how we use rapid evidence assessments, why we like them, and what we think makes them work well. So as background, I manage a service for commissioning demand-responsive evidence synthesis to support my FCDO colleagues in their decision-making on things like policy and spending. So it is an internally focused service. We're not the only part of the organisation that commissions rapid evidence assessments or other forms of structured synthesis, but we probably do produce the most reviews of any team. The service that we offer is part of a larger offer to FCDO decision makers who can access quite a wide range of existing research and commission both primary and secondary research to support their work, including traditional literature reviews. And I think we probably commission literature reviews in the hundreds each year. So anyone in theory in FCDO can request a rapid evidence assessment via the service that I run. We get far more requests than we can take on. And so we normally select what we commission based on a few key factors, including the importance of the topic to the organisation, our level of confidence that the review will be used, and other important things like feasibility and the value add of doing a new review. And we've produced more than 50 rapid evidence assessments in the last 10 years. These have largely been on international development topics, as this was a service that began in the former Department for International Development. And we're aiming to increase our output in the next financial years and beyond. And personally, I'm hoping to commission out 10 new reviews in a mix of development and now diplomacy topics in the next year. Similar to Andrea, we aim to ensure that our reviews are co-designed and co-produced to some extent with users. We suspect that the greater the engagement between the users and the research teams, the stronger the ownership of the outputs and the greater the use among my FCDO colleagues. We also hope that with this engagement, there'll be some additional longer lasting benefits from co-production, such as changes in general kind of motivation to use evidence, which we're exploring a bit at the moment. And at a minimum, we ask those requesting a review to be involved in developing the terms of reference, selecting the research team, providing feedback on outputs to make sure that they are meeting needs, especially at the kind of protocol stage, and making sure that they connect us and the researchers to other stakeholders that might find an REA useful. And all of our kind of successful requests are supported by evidence brokers. So I hope my colleagues see ourselves as brokers offering kind of a full range of brokering services rather than simply commissioners. So what we do includes helping colleagues to identify evidence gaps, shape their research questions, we procure, we project manage, and we quality assure reviews. We facilitate that contact between the potential users and the researchers, and do lots to support uptake. Okay, so why do we like rapid evidence assessments? And I think the last time I checked, about 80% of the structured reviews that we commission are rapid evidence assessments. There are a few reasons for this. I think first, they are slightly faster than full systematic reviews. I'm slightly blown away by the idea that they can be done in 5 to 10 days. I think the fastest we've ever done one is probably about 3 months. But that is faster than a field review, and that can make a difference, particularly in a context where people move jobs. So this is internally focused. People are moving roles. Interest can wane if a piece of research lasts longer than, say, 6 to 9 months. And we do sometimes respond to kind of time-bound pockets of opportunity to influence a decision that we know is going to happen. And the other reason we like them is that they're a bit more flexible methodologically, and perhaps cheekily, they allow broader scope. So there is a bit of a trade-off between rigor and speed and scope and resources. And if we reduce rigor slightly, but maintain the kind of timelines and resources that you might commit to a systematic review, you can expand the scope. And that is sometimes critical to the policy audience, who tend not to be looking for a narrow review, say, of a particular intervention, but want to ask questions like what kinds of interventions are potentially effective at delivering a particular outcome. We also like them because they tend to be attractive to teams of researchers that are subject matter experts who don't have extensive experience of systematic review methods. My experience is the market for very experienced reviewers is fairly thin, and it can be difficult for us to attract teams that combine deep subject matter expertise with deep methodological expertise. So relaxing some of the demands around things like screening and coding, we suspect leads to more competition and get some more bids in for our work. I thought I'd share kind of some reflections on what we think are the kind of key elements or the key moments that are important for making a rapid evidence assessment successful. And by successful, because everything we do is demand-led, I mean that it's used in decision making. We want, obviously, the review to be good quality, but we only really consider it a success if the evidence is used to inform decisions. And my feeling is, and this is just based on my experience, that the moments before commissioning and after a review is completed are the key moments for ensuring success. In that kind of before period, the thing we find makes a real difference is selecting the right review to take forward with the right policy team. And we do a lot of work to make sure that we're selecting the right reviews to go forward. So what we look for are clear research questions, or where the research requester hasn't quite got their clear objectives. We look for credible and ideally multiple pathways to uptake for the research. So we want to know quite a lot about how the requester expects the research to be used. And I've mentioned kind of co-design and co-production, and we think it's really important to have some form of commitment from the requester to contribute to the review or to ensure continuity if particular people are moving roles. At the moment, I think I'm running out of time, but at the moment we're piloting a bidding window process where colleagues can request a review in 1 or 2 periods per year. So we are seeing all of the review requests at the same time and ensuring we select well. I'm going to briefly mention the kind of post-review period. And that's essentially to say that we think supporting research users to understand and to consider the implications for the decision-making of the reviews is really important. And we also think it's really important to do that very flexibly. So there's a range of things that we can offer teams, from creating extra summaries to facilitating more conversations with the researchers, to being in the room when decisions are being made, to creating decision support tools that integrate different forms of evidence, including evidence from reviews. I think I'm out of time, aren't they? So I'll probably leave that there, but I have some examples if people have questions about that. I'll pass back to Jonathan.
Thank you, Harry. I think I will ask you about those questions later on, because I'd love to give tangible examples. I might put all 3 of you on the spot later on, as well as on tangible examples of things that didn't work. You don't have to name names, but sometimes you learn lessons. But Harry, that was also really inspiring. I'd love to hear more about the multiple pathways and even using decision aid tools. That sounds really cutting edge. But we'll come back to that in the Q&A. And just to let everyone know, we are working on the chat function, but we will give you an opportunity to ask questions. But before we do ask questions, Sandy, I'd love to hear your take on this. You've already been referenced. You worked for FCDO and so many others. What's your take on the best approaches for commissioning REAs?
I've been involved in reviews and rapid reviews for longer than I can remember almost. And I've had the pleasure of working with Andrea on the guidebook that she mentioned for doing rapid reviews. And I've worked with DFID and then FCDO and had interactions with Harry. So perhaps it's not surprising that all our main messages overlap hugely. So I don't think there's many controversies between us. Rapid reviews are often needed quickly when there's a new challenge, something that hasn't been given a lot of thought in the past, and there's a lot of sense making to be done that gets interspersed excuse me, with the technical steps of reviewing. So I'm going to add to what Andrea and Harry have said by emphasizing how policy and research teams can work together, not just being at the table, but how they're interacting around the table or across the screens when it's done virtually. So the success of rapid reviews rests largely on 2 teams understanding each other. And that means they need to ask each other questions, really interrogate how the other team understands the challenge ahead. So the review team needs to be asking, what's really important in this policy area? What are the crucial things to be looking for? Where are the options? Where are the constraints? What's absolutely non-negotiable? Because there's no point in bringing together beautiful evidence for something where the policy team have an option to go. And then it also requires the policy team to be asking about, so if we're doing this quickly, what does that really mean for the final product? Are there new technologies that are going to help them, and can we think of them as being reliable? So what might the trade-offs be? if there are shortcuts, what would the trade-offs be for speed and rigor? And these are judgments to be made, and they're best made by the people doing the review and the people who want to use it together. And I've found by experience that something that helps discussions hugely is having diagrams, trying to visualize the scope of a review and some of the issues within it can really focus conversations on both the big picture and the details at the same time. It can help raise issues that people may look over in a conversation otherwise. And sometimes it may be very specific. If you're looking at a program that may get rolled out, thinking about the logic model or a theory of change that takes into account how different contexts may influence how a program works. So a scribbled diagram, whether it's on a paper or on a screen, it can really focus those discussions and make sure that the important issues are really covered. And discussions like this are really helpful to get started in the first place, so that the policy team and the review team, they understand, they have a shared understanding of what they're embarking on. And then it's worth having another interaction as studies start to appear. And then the review team can say to the policy team, well, we found these studies. Is this the sort of thing you had in mind? Is this the sort of population that you were interested in, or the setting, or the program? And if it is, that's great. And if it isn't, why isn't it? So to get really specific, because that will help. Discussions that are really specific will help tighten up the criteria for deciding which studies are going to be included in the analysis. And that decision about the criteria will also depend not only the types of studies that are included, but also how many of them there might be. I mean, if the review looks at an area where there is lots of research happening, then the team may get overwhelmed by the amount of data to analyze in a very brief time. So then there might have to be conversations about which sub-areas to prioritize. And it may also be a case of sometimes being surprised by research that's there that looks at an issue from a slightly different way. So, do we want to reframe this? Do we want to look at it a little more differently? And again, that's a discussion for the review team and the policy team together. And then finally, as the findings emerge, it's really helpful to discuss together what the implications might be for those findings and how much confidence might there be in them. The review team will bring judgments about the confidence of the findings, but the policy team will know better about the opportunities. Doing rapid reviews, ideally, you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. You're going to be building on high quality work that has been done by other teams. Hopefully there's some existing systematic reviews in the area already. Of course, if there's one that's a perfect fit, then job done and nothing more is required except to think about the decisions. But that's not very likely. But if there are some systematic reviews that are vaguely related to the area, then they're very helpful for discussing the concepts, the definitions, the frameworks, again, to have the discussion between the review teams and the policymakers about the precise interest in what's there, rather than just a vague interest. And once those interests, the scope is nicely set, then looking for the studies, you can use those systematic reviews. Sometimes they'll have studies that we want to include in the new rapid review anyway. but also their search strategies might be used or the terms they've used. So a lot of thinking went into all that work before the new review was started, and you can just borrow that to get a real good start on the new work. And then the last issue to think about, but the discussion should start earlier, is about the lifespan of the work. Is this going to be a one-off rapid review? Is there an opportunity later to develop it into a systematic review? Or actually, as Andrea said herself, might it move into a living review so that the work isn't just supporting one decision, but these sorts of decisions are likely to come around again at different times or with different policy teams, and a living review would be a really good investment. So thank you, Jonathan. I will stop sharing.
That was really insightful, and Sally, I think you're sometimes too modest, if I can say that, because you've got so much experience of doing these things. And I'd love to get your take on the speed of what Harry and Andrea are also talking about, because you're often on the side of delivering things that are very broad and can be very challenging. But I want to open this up to anybody who's got some questions for any of the speakers. Please put anything in the chat function. It should be working now. And thank you for bearing with us. It's just because we went to 370 registrations, and so we had to go to a new platform. So we're a victim of success. But there's a question that I wanted to ask you, Harry, about decision aid tools. And I'd really like to ask all of you about any other insights about what else we can do to help with use. We've heard about co-design. We've heard about all sorts of other techniques to get into use. And it's really refreshing, Harry, to say even you, sat in a government department, has to really think about use. There's no guarantee, even if you've got, as you call it, a sort of demand-led model. But can you tell us a bit more, Harry, about those decision aid tools? Any information on that?
Yeah, sure. I think just to say that we've been doing this for a while, but we're still learning about how to do it well. And each review we do, we try and experiment a little bit with different ways of kind of facilitating uptake. The decision aid tool I was thinking about was from a specific example where we produced a very dense review. And the team that had requested the review had lost their kind of key analyst, who was the person that we were working with in the design. And the review, I can't remember exactly what it was, but they had some kind of brief attached to it that was still very dense. And so we reached that point at the end of the review. The contractual outputs had been delivered. We had people who were, perhaps not so comfortable with research trying to digest this massive thing. So what we did in that case was we used a few strategies. So we had some more conversations to understand what are the kind of real issues that are coming up in these decision-making conversations, because this was a period where that team was making decisions on their portfolio. What would they fund and where? And so we produced a few targeted briefs, these kind of 2 pages on specific issues that they could use in kind of the moment. And then we decided just to go a step further and think about when you're picking projects within your portfolio. So these are interventions. I can't talk too much about the topic because it's one of the few foreign policy ones we've done. What are the kind of things you need to be thinking as well as about the evidence? So they could look at these proposals that were coming in. The first thing that it was useful to do was categorize the interventions that were included. The review created a topology of intervention types, so they could put the proposal through that and understand what the intervention types were that were included in that, what was the kind of strength of evidence supporting those. And we also included other things that are relevant at that point of decision making, like how well does this proposal understand the context in which they're working, the drivers of this issue, how close is that connection between the problems that they've identified and the particular interventions that they're picking out. What are their approaches to, do they have a theory of change? Is it an adequate theory of change? Is it well described? Do they have a decent approach to monitoring? How would they adapt this if it's not working? So it's bringing together, as well as the evidence that we got through this rapid evidence assessment, all of the other things you need to think about when you're reviewing these proposals and put it together. So, you could take out information from the proposal, put it through this tool that will give you a rating and show you where some of the weaker areas were. So it was a very bespoke thing and something we're just trying out, but I think it worked really well and helped them in those kind of portfolio decision-making moments.
Thank you, Harry. It's really good to have tangible examples, and I totally understand you can't mention some of the sensitive policy topics. But Andrea and Sandy, I wanted to ask you about technology. There's a few questions here about AI and technology. Sandy, you've also brought up there are actually trade-offs between the speed and the rigor. But I wonder if you've got any thoughts, Sandy, if I come to you first, on AI and the technologies that might assist us. But also think, Sandy and Andrea, try and think yourself into the commissioner, the hat. What should they be asking for realistically? I know you're eminent scholars, but imagine you're them. Sandy, what do you think?
Okay, so first of all, they should be asking a team, not an individual, and I'm not the technology expert within my team. But having said that, we have been using technology to speed our reviews for a long time. Just fairly simple technologies like priority screening. So you train the software to recognize the sorts of studies that you're interested in, and then it'll put to the top of your screening pile more like that, so that you can you'll tick them off quickly, and then when you get to the point where actually there's very few to see, you can say, okay, well, we've done enough. We won't screen the rest because it's so unlikely to miss anything that's terribly important. And some people have been quite nervous about that, thinking, oh, well, you're not looking at them all, what are you going to miss? But nobody seemed to ask, what did you miss when there was no possibility of doing anything except screen all of it? And it was done by tired reviewers at the end of the day in front of the television. So do not assume that for every task, a real human being does it best. If the software has been trained well, there may be some tasks that it does more consistently well.
Yeah.
Then there are other things like simple clustering of studies can give you a very quick insight into the possible range of things that are there. That might help very early in a review to say, well, look, this is the sort of stuff that seems to be thrown up by the literature. Which of these might we be interested in? Which ones do we want to throw out? We're never going to look at that lot. We won't bother wasting our time with it, but we're going to focus on something else instead. So it's sort of at that stage of thinking of the scope of the review. So that's fairly straightforward. The generative AI, I really don't know anything about. I'm sure some of my colleagues would be much better at telling you. I'm just slightly wary at the moment because I think that quite often what we want with any research and any reviewing is a degree of creativity. And I'm not quite sure how much creativity there is in AI yet. So I think that's all I can say.
Well, Sandy, be honest, who really knows the full potential? We've all been put on the back foot by generative AI. By the way, at IPPO, we did an event specifically on some of the new technologies in AI. And indeed, one of your colleagues, Sandy, spoke on that. So we'll share that in the many other resources we'll share to everybody who's registered today. But Andrea, do you want to have any thoughts on AI and indeed technology generally, what it can offer? What would you recommend to the commissioners, whether they're a funder or policymaker, when it comes to AI and technology?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing reviews for many, many years as well as Sandy. So, for probably around 20 years now. So I remember when we used to do systematic reviews back in the day, we would actually carry boxes around of us with printed articles. you know, we have data extraction forms that we would write off, and then we would hand it to someone who would do all the data entry into an Excel file, right? So, and I remember like taking my box of articles to the cottage for the summer vacation, and I was going to do some screening there and data abstraction. And, you know, so I think that, you know, like what Sandy was saying, that some of the, even just doing it online is a big step up from trying to keep track of all those paper copies and, you know, that type of thing. So, you know, our team, we have our own in-house tool that we've been using for about 15 years. Called Synthesizer. And recently in the last 3 years, I would say, so I did receive a Canadian Foundation for Innovation grant to work on an AI tool to kind of combine our Synthesizer tool with this tool that has been developed within the legal discipline. So it's been used in legal cases in the US predominantly. So basically what that tool does is it brings in the whole database in its entirety. So it brings in PubMed in its entirety, and then it queries PubMed to find those articles. And then we have to do some training on it. And then we just keep training on it. And then, you know, eventually we don't get anything else. So in those reviews, we actually skip the librarian step, and we'll have to supplement it with the literature search of Embase. But usually then we put the records from Embase, just because you can't grab Embase in its entirety, and some of the, you know, different databases have proprietary restrictions, so you just have to be aware of that. So then we would bring in the ones, we download them and bring them in and query it in the similar kind of way. So we've done that in about 17 of our rapid reviews. We've done them for like very urgent requests. You know, we are doing some evaluation studies on that tool, and hopefully eventually going to make it publicly available. Right now, it's just been used, you know, even though it's been available for many years in legal domain, like I said, I think as scientists we're hesitant, like what Sandy was mentioning, you know, but the hope is that if the evaluation goes well and whatnot, we make the proper tweaking to the tool that needs to happen, that we would be able to provide that to centers like internationally is kind of the goal with that. So, you know, in terms of our team's comfort though, because we have access to 25 plus casual staff who we can pay by the hour, and they, you know, are highly skilled. Some of them have been with us for a decade, you know, for at least 10 years. Our comfort is usually to screen manually still to this day. You know, we're doing a rapid scoping review right now for Ontario Health, which is our provincial policy decision maker. And it's not a 5 or 10 day timeline. It's more like a 3-4 month timeline, which we are also more comfortable with. You know, we had about 15,000 titles and abstracts, and we decided to screen them, but we're only having one person screen them. So we had a few iterations of pilot testing to make sure we were all on the same page, and we decided to manually screen those. In terms of what we've been using AI for right now, it's been mostly at the screening level. We also have used tools that assess the relevance level, kind of like what Sandy was saying, but we haven't really moved past that really in our reviews as of yet. And I think really it is because of extreme caution and comfort level. And I guess if it was from a policymaker's perspective, it would be thinking, you know, how much would we miss when we have, you know, people screening 15,000 in front of the TV, like what Sandy was saying, versus, you know, should we have just gone, you know, with the AI program and done it. So it's a trade-off. You have to think about it and think about your timelines and scope, and, you know, also the importance. And also if you're doing a meta-analysis, you know, are you doing a network meta-analysis for that? You may want to make sure you have every single study, but if we're doing more like a mapping, you know, evidence gap map or a scoping review, maybe you're okay if we miss a couple studies, so we could use the AI in those cases.
Thank you, Andrea. And by the way, we do talk about some of those issues in the report, but I wanted to go back almost upstream to the question of the demand and the setting of questions and the prioritization. There's a few questions on that, but before I get to some of the questions in the chat, I want to ask my own question about this, which is almost a sort of meta question about making the case for rapid evidence assessments at all. So I was fortunate to work in the UK Parliament, thanks to the CAPE project, the Capability in Academic Policy Engagement. But there was an argument like, why would we do a rapid evidence assessment when I can go on Google, or I can, I actually used a particular AI product when I was working in a government department. I won't name the product or the department, but it was extraordinary what it came up with. Why would we use REAs at all when we could go to individual experts or do a very light touch literature review? I wonder if anyone has to make that case still, or has arguments. Harry, could I try and come to you? Do you have to make the case for why REAs rather than a light touch, literature review, particularly when there's such urgent demand for some of these things? How do you make the case for REAs?
Yeah, it can be tricky. Yeah, we do get some comments back. Why would you have a demand-driven service like this isn't going to work? People don't have the time when you can, we've got a free service that will give you a literature review in 3 weeks from you submitting your email. So why would I do an REA? We try to make the case as you do in the guidance that you'll get a better, more accurate answer if you take the time to do things. I think something that we stress that this, we call them rapid evidence assessments with our procurement timelines as well. They're really not rapid in a policy making sense. And so we make it clear right at the start that these are your medium-term priorities that are sticking around. You're going to be working on these issues for years. We hope you will use this report when you engage in decision making for years. If you're going to be doing that, it's worth spending 6 months getting the best evidence that you can. If we can do a full systematic review and you can wait that long, great. And sometimes that works. People are very used to doing literature reviews still in, across the Foreign Office. But that's the case that we try to make. And I think we have some, there's always some good examples that you can bring out, like I think you've done in the guidance as well, where relying on a single study or a narrow literature review has led people down the wrong path and wasted lots and lots of money.
Mm. Yeah, those scare stories about wasting money or missing key studies is important. But Sandy and then Andrea, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about how you make the case for these more rigorous methods when it's so much easier to do a light touch literature review.
Well, it depends what your baseline is, I think. You talked about, doing a Google and seeing what's there. I think that the risk there is that you'll find more information from the people who shout the loudest than from the people who think the hardest. So that's an absolute no-no, especially in, now that we have so much fake news. I think it's a huge risk. Mm-hmm. Going to specialists alone, I think one of the problems, that it does depend on what you're interested in, but for a lot of rapid reviews, the scope is quite broad, and the specialists may well be specialists in part of the picture, but not all of it. So they would respond very helpfully, but not necessarily give a comprehensive answer, even in terms of the scope, let alone the details. So I think that rapid reviews, they're not perfect. They may not be as precise or as comprehensive, but they are reducing the risk of being seriously wrong. I think decision makers are into risk.
Mm-hmm. They are indeed. Andrea, have you got any experience of making the case for those rapid evidence assessments?
Yeah, I remember we did some work on medication for macular degeneration as an example, and there was this one randomized trial that was coming out that was going to compare the 3 products. And I remember speaking with our HTA, with an HTA organization here in Canada, and saying, what's the point of doing this? It wasn't a rapid review, but a knowledge synthesis. It was actually a systematic review. We could just wait for the results of the trial, right? So the one thing is that the trial takes a lot of time, it's expensive, and you're only comparing 3 interventions, whereas when we did our systematic review, we were able to identify and compare a lot of different interventions. So in the end, I think we convinced them, but sometimes, once in a while we do get that question posed. I think for us, it's been not so much of an issue with policy, but more within clinical practice guidelines, where, you know, the experience is to update clinical practice guidelines, having two clinicians go through and find the papers that they know of and just synthesize those. And they call that a systematic review. They don't even call it a rapid review. And, you know, we wouldn't even call that a rapid review. We would call that like an expert opinion literature review as an example, right? And like we've worked with clinicians who said there's only 2 studies out there on this topic, and then we do the systematic review or the rapid review and we find 30, you know, and then it's just kind of like, well, you know, but then they will tell me, well, that one wasn't done well, and that, you know, all of these little nuances in the studies, which, you know, maybe there is from a clinical perspective, some of them were done better than others, but it doesn't mean that, like, we like to show the totality of evidence and then let the decision maker kind of make their opinion as to whether they will use that for their decision or not. You know, so it's been interesting where time and time again, we've always found more than what they thought was out there. So that would be my, you know, rationale to continue doing rapid reviews.
Yeah. Even though you've done literally hundreds, you're still, the appetite is still there for more.
Yeah, well, it is. I'm not saying it's not challenging. I have my moments where I said, why did we say yes to this project? You know, I think a lot of us do. But, you know, and especially when we're trying to engage everyone and so quickly and trying to do it properly and not being tokenistic, like really trying to bring people together and really listening and, you know, working together can bring its challenges. But I feel the impact is so great that it's worth, you know, the blood, sweat, and tears to get that product. So that we can hopefully help with decision making.
Indeed, and with that decision making, there's been some questions about the prioritization of the policy topics, and I really was struck by how much dialogue all 3 of you invested in. But I wanted, Sandy, maybe if I come to you about this question of prioritization, but also that issue of the initial bit of setting the question, setting the exact question. What advice do you have on that prioritization process and the setting of the question, Sandy? But I'm going to open up to all 3 of you after Sandy.
Okay, so I think it's important to come at the issue from at least two directions. One is, what is it that we'd like to know, ideally? And the other is, what is the chance this literature will tell us anything at all? So, you know, there are sometimes somebody might think, oh, it'd be really nice to know if this program works. You know, has anybody done any randomized controlled trials on it? And spend a lot of time doing a perfect search and finding the answer that no, they haven't. So it was a lot of work. We know there's a gap, but it was an awful lot of very careful work for a gap, which might have been done somewhat quicker. So at the same time as thinking what ideally do we want to know, also have a quick scan of the literature to get an idea of the sort of studies that are available. You know, in this field, how much has the literature developed? How new is it? I think in terms of emerging literatures, some ideas are so new that you know, evaluations are necessarily preliminary. You know, have we got any ideas about how this might work? Have we got the studies that tell us how to measure the outcomes we're interested in? So it's a case of looking for sort of looking at the possible questions and the likelihood of getting some useful answers. So I think of it as sort of gauging the literature, what's there and what could it bear? What would we feel comfortable drawing conclusions about? And then trying to target the best that we think it can bear, so that then we think, okay, so the literature tells us this now. Where do we want new research to take us to the next step? So not always looking at the what works question to begin with. Sometimes it'll have to be a preliminary question.
Thank you, Sandy. It was just, I believe this initial bit is such an important part of the whole process, but the danger is, certainly my own experience, is you rush to, like, we've got to get on with it, but getting that question.
We have some, can I just add one more thing? We have once with DFID a few years ago, we had an iteration where we would be doing very quick searches and we'd get a response back from them within a day, and they'd say what out of that quick output was the sort of thing they're interested in, what weren't they interested in. We'd refine our search and we'd do it again. So we went around 3 iterations just to find out what we were actually interested in, you know, what was a fruitful area to look at.
That sounds a really good tip. Harry, I wonder if I could come to you about this question of how you prioritize topics. You mentioned about, you know, the sort of balance of the policy. What's the most important policy question? Also, if you could, this is selfishly, you mentioned about evidence brokers. I'd love you if you could say a bit more about what their role is in all this in the initial questioning and setting up of the review.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, we've got a set of criteria that we've more or less standardized at this point, and this new process is we give people a month to come with initial ideas and answer questions about the priority of the policy area. Can you demonstrate to us that this is an important topic for the organisation? Can you convince us that you're going to be using this in policy making? What is the value add here? What resources have you already found and already looked for? So we've got a relatively standardized process, and it works, I think, quite well. I'm excited to see when we get all of these requests coming in together rather than spread out over the year, so we can really pick the ones that we think are the highest value. We also have this time pressure of the financial year, so getting things aligned with it, so we're ready to go at the start of the financial year, and we give ourselves time to do those initial phases is really important. Yeah, I think those are the kind of major criteria. I could share the exact criteria if that would be useful at some point. In terms of brokers, yeah, I think I don't see myself as solely a commissioner. I think a lot of my work is raising understanding of the importance of evidence use in general, and specifically reviews among people making policy programming decisions in FCDO, helping them, which is helping them to understand their evidence needs, which is probably the hardest bit, or I think the bit I find the most tricky, and the bit that requires lots of time and relationship building. And then helping them to, if it is right for a review, build it up into something that we can commission and can be answerable and doesn't already exist and meets their decision-making timelines. We have a whole range of services that users could go to, and one of our other tasks as kind of an evidence broker is making sure that we are aware of all of those and that we can connect users to the right one. If it's not right for a review, where should they go? Who should they be talking to get the kind of evidence that they need? If it's a primary study, who is the person that they should be talking to? And we accompany the user and the research team through the whole review period where it's being produced, and that involves things like coordinating meetings, making sure we coordinate feedback on reviews, pushing people to get engaged on both sides. And then that bit at the end, which I've already spoken about, which is I think the really critical bit of taking that, doing a little bit more investment, and really helping people to work with the evidence that they've just spent maybe a year getting.
Thank you, Harry. Yes, please, if you could share those criteria, if you're allowed to, that would be really helpful. But Andrea, before I come to you on this question of prioritization and setting the question right at the outset, there's a few people sharing some really useful insights, just the panelists. If it's okay, basically Alan and Sam, I'm going to share that with everybody if that's okay, because there were really useful insights on the value of rapid evidence assessments and things like reducing bias and issues of equity. So Alan and Sam, do drop us a message if you don't mind us sharing that more broadly. Belinda, I will come to you at 2 a.m. in Australia right now, I promise, because you made that effort. But before I come to you, Belinda, Andrea, I wanted to ask you about this issue of prioritization, what are the enablers and barriers, and setting the question. You mentioned the James Lind Alliance in your slides. I wonder if you could tell people a bit more about them. People are not familiar with James Lind.
Yeah, so we, when it comes to policy decision makers, we don't use the James Lind Alliance approach. That's only for patient public partner nominated topics. But in terms of like when we're working with policy decision makers, we would be similar to Sandy in that, you know, we would have the meeting, we have like a little intake form where we have a series of questions. It's a lot of questions, you know, and asking them like the scope, the timelines, what is this decision being made for? Has this been done before? You know, do you see papers of kind of that are most of interest to you that could help us kind of shape the review? Do you know of papers that exist on this topic? So we kind of do a lot of, you know, questioning and probing like that. And then it's an iterative approach where we take their information, go back and work with our librarians, and then seeing, you know, how broad is this? And then also seeing like, can you find some papers that are relevant to this topic? And then sending those to the policy decision makers and saying, you know, is this kind of like what you were looking for? And that type of thing. So we do kind of have this iterative like back and forth and, you know, trying to build off of, we have this online form that they submit, but then, you know, we try to have this phone call with them. The intake phone call is really important. So that's what we do with our policy decision-making organizations. And then when it comes to the patient and public partners, so because these haven't been prioritized and these are coming from individual people, some of them come from organizations like patient advocacy groups, but from the most part, they really are just your everyday people who have questions that they need answers to. So for them, we collect all of them in a database and then we dedupe them. And then we do interviews with them where we would do like very much probing them and why is this important and the impact and like asking them all of those questions. And then what we would do is we would do some quick literature searches on there to see if it has been done before, because if there's high quality reviews already, why would we waste our time and energy on that? I mean, for policymakers and with the patient public partners, we always look for pre-existing reviews to see if we can update it. Can we build on the knowledge or evidence base that's already there, like Sandy has mentioned? And then the ones that, you know, seem like they are unique and have not had a review done before, then we do this panel process where we would probably be using similar criteria to you, Harry, where we're trying to gauge the level of impact, trying to gauge who would be using this information. How is it going to increase or improve our health system here in Canada? You know, how is it going to improve patient care? And then, you know, we go the extra step of finding other decision makers that could be on the project with them and kind of co-create that project together. So that's kind of how we've tried to separate it. And that's how we've tried to make sure that only the really most impactful projects are the ones that we take on. And also reducing research waste. We didn't really talk about that a little bit, but hinting at it. Like I said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there's a high quality Cochrane review that's going to answer the policymaker's question, there you go, you know, use that one. But trying to make sure that all of our projects really are unique for sure.
Really important point about research waste. And indeed, there's a question here about what we do when there's multiple duplications of the same question. I've certainly been there where people are asking the same question because it's a topical, the big issue of the day. I'm really conscious of time because I want all three of our panelists just to have a final comment. And I'm afraid, panelists, I'm going to ask you something impossible. Even though we talked about the importance of time and complexity and debiasing, I want you to come up with one piece of advice, your top piece of advice for a commissioner. I know that's a desperately unfair question, and you've come up with much longer lists. But if there's one thing after your many years of experience that you think we should pass on to people either new or wanting to improve their game on commissioning rapid reviews, I'd love to hear from you. But we'll give a few more minutes. I'm just going to try and answer some more of these questions. And panelists, if you can answer some of the questions by email, but on the chat function, that would be great. But I probably might only have time. Oh, no, there's more coming through. I'll do my best in the last few minutes. But there's a really important question about grey literature. And I see that somebody's asked this from my partnership with CAPE. We had this issue of the vast body of grey literature, i.e. things that are not academic, peer-reviewed, academic journal type research. but things that are really important, particularly for policymakers. You know, we could be talking about a UN report, OECD, a think tank, you know, really rigorous pieces of research and analysis. But how on earth do we include them? And in fact, we actually had to exclude them in one of our rapid reviews for Parliament because of just the time pressure and trying to get a handle of it. I don't want to put anyone on the spot because I really find this question very hard, but does any of our three panelists want to try and answer that? Put your hand up if you want to have a go or nod. But no, Sandy's crossing heads. Andrew, you're smiling. I'm taking that as more of a positive response. Do you want to try and answer that question of grey literature?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably use it depends answer. Depends on your timelines. I mean, we attempt to search it for our rapid reviews. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll have, like, if we have a larger team, like we have access to quite a few staff, as I had said, and even with our Spore Evidence Alliance, with the 35 teams across Canada, sometimes some of our staff will help other teams. And so we'll have like a little grey literature committee. So we'll nominate, you know, 3 or 4 staff and they're going to be responsible for searching the grey literature and working with the librarian on that, while the others are doing all the screening of the published literature. And we usually use the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health. They have it's called the CADIT Grey Matters Guide that we like to use to kind of guide it's quite comprehensive though, but we like to use that to kind of guide what sources to search for the grey literature. But, you know, if you have access to a lot of staff and also librarians, like sometimes we'll have one librarian focus on the published and then another one focus on the grey literature, with cross communication, of course, between the two of them for their learning. Sometimes doing the parallelization of tasks, which we talk about in the WHO guide, helps to kind of make sure that we're able to include the published and the unpublished literature. But it's tricky. I'm making my answer makes it sound like it's easy. It's not.
It really is very challenging indeed in some areas. Harry and Sandy, I'll see if you want to say something on the grey literature issue, because there's 3 questions in that. But I am conscious of time. And before we do that, just panelists, there's some really good questions. One particularly on the stakeholder engagement process. If you could answer some of that by email, because we're rapidly running out of time to answer them verbally. If you could do it on the chat function, that would be great if possible. But Sandy and Harry, do you want to pass on that question of grey literature? Because I know it's a bit of a hospital pass. It's a really difficult one. Do you want to have a go?
I was just going to say that we include grey literature in all of our rapid evidence assessments, and I think it's normally because of the topics we're looking at. I think for some topics it's critical. We did a review recently on barriers to addressing climate losses and damages. I think 90% of the literature we found for that was grey literature. If we hadn't have done that, it would have been a very, very limited review. I think normally our reviews have subject matter experts in the team who will have a good idea of the best sources of grey literature. And if they don't, they'll have someone on the steering group. And we try and get the advisors, so the thematic advisors in FCDO, to recommend places to search for literature too.
Thank you, Harry. That's really good reality check, that up to 90% could be grey literature. We really must take that into account. But look, I'm conscious of time. I'm not going to be able to answer all the other questions, but thank you, Andrea, for doing some chat function responses. And please, if anyone wants to share resources in our last 8 minutes, go for it, because I'm sure there's other things that would be useful to people who have registered here. But I want to give an opportunity for our speakers just to have one final say, and anything else that you would advise commissioners in terms of rapid reviews. Ideally just one. I know that's unfair, but there's nothing like being put on the spot. If there was one thing, maybe it's from all those painful ones that didn't work as much as the one that do. I find you learn from mistakes as much as successes. But Sandy, maybe I can start with you. If you had any final thoughts you want to share in our last few minutes, and advice for commissioners.
I don't think I have advice for commissioners, but I'm very aware that this whole discussion is part of the science of getting evidence into policy. And despite the impact agenda, I don't think the science of getting policy challenges into academia has the same high profile. It's ironic, really, because there's a lot of talk about multidisciplinary research in academia these days. But I think what I would like to see is more people understanding how intellectually challenging and fascinating and fun this work is. It's not just a service. It's great academic work. So I want more people excited about it.
Well, that's a lovely way to end, Sandy, for you. I agree. I mean, it's challenging, and that's a good thing. You know, it was a lot easier when I used ChatGPT, but it was desperately unsophisticated in the front end and actually dangerous. So fun and fascinating is a really good one. Harry, can I come to you next? Okay, I know I'm putting you on the spot for one piece of advice, and maybe advice is the wrong word, but if there's one insight that you've learned that you've got to pass on to people in other fields, what would that be?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it before. I think if there's any other commissioners of systematic reviews, rapid reviews out there, I think picking the review that you take on well in a context where you've got way more requests than you can handle. Picking the right review is really important, and particularly the team that you're working with. If they understand what they want and why, and can commit to being an important part of the review itself, that will make all the difference.
I think that advice on the team is such an important one. I know there was a question on how we create a team. Can I just give a big shout out to librarians and information specialists as part of the team? If you're commissioning, make sure they've got access to one of them. And it's really lovely to see how many librarians are actually getting onto journal articles, as well as the panelists mentioned, the policymakers themselves are getting into journal articles, because this is a team effort. Andrea, I'm going to give you the last say. Sorry to put you on the spot, but the last comment, insight on your advice. Just before I do that, there's a question from Alistair, just to reassure you, we will put everything onto one web page, the slides, the guide, links to other resources. Indeed, I've written a blog, and anything else people want to share in the last few minutes, we'll put it all on one page just to reassure you. But Andrea, the final thoughts from you.
Thank you. I like to have the last word. So I think my advice or guidance or insight would be not to forget about equity. And I think that, what we experienced in Canada, especially during COVID, was all of the questions that came out at the beginning, not what I should say actually is that none of them really focused on equity. And it wasn't until the pandemic had been around for a while that equity started to become an important area of concern. So I would say, can we think about in every single topic, is there an equity lens that we can take with this? So that's kind of what I would leave people with. And especially given that the people who experienced the most COVID and the most deaths and in terms of burden of illness were people who experienced health inequities here in Canada. But yet those were the people that we didn't even think about when we posed all of those policy questions and did all those rapid reviews at the beginning. So I think focusing on equity from the very, very start of anything and thinking in all of our rapid reviews, is there a health inequity or health equity focus that we can take in everything that we do.
Thank you, Andrew. What a great way to end. Also, there was a question about equity, such an important area. And if you've got shareable advice about the particular methods of rapid evidence assessments that are very good in equity, whether it's who's doing them, the type of research, the decision makers, the stakeholders, that would be very welcome. But I want to finish now and just really thank our three fantastic speakers, Sandy Oliver, Harry Akinini, and Andrea Tricco. Really useful. I think you've been very modest, actually, because I know how much depth of experience you have that you've really brought to the fore. And I hope that When we come back, maybe in years to come, we'll find we've got an answer to AI, but I suspect the answer will still be the deep human knowledge and judgment that we need, that you've brought to this event. I didn't invite anyone from AI to speak. Maybe that will change. Maybe I'm just naive to think that the machines will take over. But you as three speakers have been fantastic. We'll share everything in one document, probably a web page on the IPPO website. But I just wanted to also thank the funders for this guide, this commissioning guide, and the people who end up doing the legwork, the Rapid Research Evaluation Appraisal Lab, Capabilities in Academic Policy Engagement, the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, and the International Public Policy Observatory, IPPO. Got to thank you because they made so much of this happen. And thank you also for our organizers, particularly Deborah, who's in the room with me, and Sarah, who had to manage going onto a totally new platform with seconds to go because of the demand for this. It will be made into a video recording for YouTube. I suspect a lot of people will be feeding into that, particularly our Australian colleagues. Thank you from Sachs Institute. By the way, you are a case study in the report, Sachs Institute. You do great work. Thank you for getting up at 2 a.m. to join us. So thanks, everybody. That's out of time now. Really appreciate all your time, and thank you again to the speakers.